My mom believed she could swap out my father for her creepy new boyfriend and force me to call him dad, but she didn't realize I was still in touch with my real dad. Can you imagine finding out your own mother helped frame your innocent father for murder, then tried to replace him with the actual killer? What if the person you trusted most betrayed you in the most unthinkable way, turning your home into a nightmare, all while you were just a kid? Because that's my story, and it's a story of how I fought back. I was only 13 when my whole world imploded. My dad, my hero, was suddenly behind bars, convicted of manslaughter. Just 5 months before, we were at a bar. I remember it so clearly. He wasn't even drinking. He went to the restroom, then came out minutes later, utterly panicked, covered in blood. He yelled for someone to call the police, and they were there in a flash. But then they just put him in handcuffs and took him away. No real questions, no explanations. The next time I saw him, he was behind glass. It never made sense. Not for a second. Dad never had a violent bone in his body. He swore on everything he didn't do it. But it was how my mom acted afterward. That's what really gnawed at me. She brought Brandon home almost immediately. The very first day, she looked at me and said, "He's your new dad now. The other one? He's a monster. A killer you need to distance yourself from for your own safety." Can you believe that? My own mother. I was so confused, so lost. I didn't know what to believe. But then, 5 months later, she told me they were engaged. And I had to start calling Brandon Daddy. That was it. That's when something shifted deep inside me, and I became absolutely convinced of my dad's innocence. And that's also when Brandon got comfortable. Too comfortable. He'd sit at the dinner table, just staring at me, eating so slowly, and say things like, "You're growing up so fast, becoming such a pretty young woman." My skin crawled. The worst part? My mom thought it was sweet. Sweet. I finally worked up the courage to tell her, "Mom, Brandon makes my skin crawl." She just rolled her eyes, called me dramatic. But she must have told him. That very night, after she was asleep, Brandon snuck into my room. He grabbed my wrist so hard it left marks. His voice was a low growl. You know what happens to naughty girls who snitch. Terror like I'd never known seized me. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew then and there I couldn't trust my mom. I had to keep it a secret. But I started keeping another secret too. I began writing letters to Dad. I'd hide them in my textbooks, then mail them from my friend's house after school. He'd write back through a prison email account I'd secretly set up. It was our lifeline. Things escalated dramatically one Thursday. I came home from school to find out my mom had changed my last name on all my school records to Brandon's. Without telling me. "You'll thank me when you're older," she chirped. That night, Brandon came into my room, supposedly to celebrate being a real family now. He sat on my bed, put his hand on my thigh, and told me I should be grateful to have a dad who cares. A wave of disgust and fury washed over me. I shoved him away, scrambled to the bathroom, and locked myself in until he left. I remember writing to Dad about it. The letter he sent back wasn't an email this time. It was on real paper. Parts of it were damp, almost see-through. He had cried. That nearly broke me. It showed me just how much he was suffering, how much he missed me. But there was one thing I looked forward to, his birthday. I enthusiastically asked Mom if I could visit him. "Please," I begged, "I know you don't like him, but it's his birthday. Just today, for a few minutes." Her answer crushed me. And then, she gave me something even worse. She said we couldn't go because that exact weekend, Brandon, coincidentally, had car show tickets, and we all had to go. He'd even requested adjoining hotel rooms. My stomach plummeted. When I pushed back, saying I'd rather visit Dad, she exploded. "He's a killer. You are not visiting a murderer." I told her he was innocent, that he was still my dad. And that's when Brandon backhanded me. My head snapped back, the sting hot and immediate. My mom just stood there. She said nothing. I was forced to go with them that weekend. And while I was sleeping, the worst thing happened. Brandon snuck into my room. He was drunk. And this time, he didn't restrain himself. His hand went all the way. I had never felt so disgusting, so utterly humiliated. I felt utterly broken on the drive home. Then, the week we got back, my mom found the hidden letters from Dad. She burned them in the backyard. And as punishment for communicating with him, she took my bedroom door off its hinges for monitoring. Brandon saw this as an opportunity. He'd stand in the doorway at night, just watching me sleep. That was my breaking point. The next day, I snuck into the school library after hours and emailed the district attorney. I must have sent an hour-long rambling email that made no sense. I didn't even know what I expected. I was just so numb. But 2 weeks later, I got a reply from Dad. It was long, so long, telling me all the right things, how everything would be okay. But one line stuck out. Did you check where I said? Confused, I reread it. Check where? I frantically scrolled through every email he'd ever sent. And then I found it. In one of the more recent emails, Dad had told me to go up to the attic and look behind the radiator. I must have been too heartbroken and distracted when I got that email, too crushed after my mom's refusal to let me visit him. I'd missed it entirely. But now I made a mental note. A big one. I waited until Mom and Brandon went on their next date night. When the house was finally silent, my hands shaking, I climbed into the attic with a flashlight. Behind the radiator, wrapped in plastic, was a journal. I opened it to the marked page Dad had mentioned. It was dated weeks before his arrest. In his familiar handwriting, it read, "It's been a few weeks since I caught Lauren and Brandon sneaking off into the bar. I don't know how to confront her." My blood ran cold. Shock, disbelief, a searing pain, it all hit me at once. And then I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. They were back. Early. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs as I clutched the journal. I had seconds. Brandon's heavy footsteps were on the stairs, each creak of the old wood sending a jolt through me. My hands trembled so badly I nearly dropped the flashlight. I shoved the journal under my shirt, its leather cover cold against my skin, and scrambled towards the attic opening. Too slow. Brandon's head appeared through the hole just as I reached the ladder. His dark eyes locked onto mine. Unreadable. He climbed up, his broad shoulders barely fitting. I backed against the wall, the rough wood digging into my spine, the journal pressing against my stomach. He looked around, slowly, deliberately, taking in the disturbed dust, the moved boxes near the radiator. "What are you doing up here?" His voice was calm, but with an edge that made my skin prickle. "Looking for my old stuffed animals," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. A pathetic lie. He didn't believe me. I saw it in the tightening of his jaw, the flexing of his hands. He stepped closer. I could smell the wine on his breath, mixed with his expensive cologne that always made me sick. "You're a terrible liar," he said, "just like your father." The words felt like a slap. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise, and yanked me towards the ladder. I had to use my other hand to press the journal tight against my body, keeping it from falling. Mom was waiting at the bottom, arms crossed, foot tapping. Annoyed. "Why are you sneaking around like a thief?" Brandon cut in smoothly. "She's probably hiding something." He gave her that fake smile that never reached his eyes. "Maybe we should search her room?" A flash of something dark, predatory, flickered in his eyes. Panic surged. "No," I blurted. I can't sleep without my door, and I was looking for my old teddy bear." The words tumbled out, desperate. Mom rolled her eyes, but she bought it, probably too tired for more drama. That night, I waited. I heard their snores, Brandon's deep rumble, Mom's softer breathing. The house settled into its nighttime creaks. I carefully hid the journal inside my pillowcase, feeling its corners dig into my cheek as I lay down. I couldn't risk reading more with Brandon checking on me every hour, his shadow appearing in my doorway like clockwork. Saturday morning. Mom made pancakes, humming off-key, like nothing had happened. The sickening normalcy of it all. Brandon kept staring at me, his eyes following my every move as I pushed food around my plate. I excused myself, took the journal with me to the bathroom, and hid it in the toilet tank, wrapped in a plastic bag. The cold water on my arms felt like a moment of peace. Monday at school, I snuck into the computer lab during lunch. The room was empty. My hands trembling, I started taking photos of each journal page with my phone, avoiding the glare of the fluorescent lights. Some were blurry. My hands shook so much. The entries went back years. Dad's handwriting becoming more frantic over time. He wrote about his suspicions. Brandon's car parked at weird hours, Mom acting distant, a motel receipt in her purse, Brandon lurking at the bar during Dad's shifts, like a predator studying its prey. My heart pounded as I uploaded everything to a cloud account under a fake name, then double-checked, triple-checked, that all photos were deleted from my phone. I knew Brandon might check it. He'd been going through my things more and more. I was right. When I got home, he was in my room, sitting on my bed like he owned the place. My drawers were dumped out, clothes scattered. Mattress flipped. Jewelry box emptied. Where is it? His voice was dangerously quiet. I played dumb, feigning confusion, though terror was a cold knot in my stomach. He grabbed my shoulders, shaking me hard, my teeth clacking together. I know you found something in the attic. Don't play stupid. Just then, Mom came home, her keys jingling. What's going on? She asked, surveying the destruction. Brandon's demeanor changed instantly. He smiled, that fake smile, and said he was helping me reorganize my messy room, that I'd asked for his help. She believed him. Of course she did. It was easier. That night at dinner, Brandon announced they were moving up the wedding. From next year to next month. He couldn't wait any longer to make our family official. Mom squealed, clapping her hands like a child. I felt sick. The chicken on my plate looked gray, unappetizing. For the next few weeks, Brandon watched me constantly. He installed a camera in the hallway, pointing at where my door used to be, its red light blinking like an evil eye. He started driving me to and from school, no more bus with friends. He'd wait in the parking lot, engine running, scrutinizing everyone who talked to me. He took my phone at night, placing it on his nightstand, out of reach. But I kept working. During the day, I printed pages from the journal at school, hiding them in my locker behind old textbooks. I needed help, but who could I trust? Teachers seemed oblivious, friends wouldn't understand. Then I remembered Uncle Henry, Dad's best friend since high school. The kind of man who showed up to help without being asked. Mom had banned him after Dad's arrest, calling him a bad influence. Lies. Uncle Henry was a good man, smelled like sawdust, always had butterscotch candies in his pocket. I found his number in an old address book Mom had forgotten in the kitchen junk drawer. I called him from the payphone outside school during PE, clutching my stomach and telling my teacher I felt sick. Uncle Henry answered on the third ring, his gruff voice softening when I said my name. I talked fast, words tumbling out, telling him I needed help, that Dad was innocent, that I had proof. He told me to slow down, to breathe. Then he said to meet him at the public library after school the next day. He'd tell my mom he saw me walking and offered a ride if she asked. His voice was steady, reassuring. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things would be okay. Brandon was suspicious when I said I was staying late for a group project. He grilled me about who was in my group, what the project was. But my history teacher backed me up when he called, probably annoyed at being bothered. I practically ran to the library. Uncle Henry was waiting in his old pickup truck, red paint faded but clean. He looked older, more gray, deeper lines around his eyes. I showed him photos of the journal entries on my phone. His face darkened with each swipe, knuckles white on the steering wheel. I always knew something was off, he muttered. Too many holes, too convenient. He asked if I still had the actual journal. I told him where I hid it. He nodded. We need more than just Dad's suspicions. We need real evidence, witnesses. He knew some people who worked at the bar that night. Maybe they saw something the police missed. Over the next 2 weeks, we met 3 more times at the library. Each meeting felt like a spy movie, me checking over my shoulder. Uncle Henry tracked down Edward, who worked security that night. Edward, a big guy with kind eyes, remembered Brandon being there, which was weird because Brandon had told police he was home all evening. Edward saw Brandon go into the bathroom just before Dad, maybe 30 seconds apart. He'd been too scared to speak up after Dad's quick arrest. Scared of getting involved, scared of Brandon. Then Uncle Henry found Caroline, the bartender with curly red hair and a sharp memory. She said Brandon had been coming around for weeks before the incident, always asking about Dad's schedule, pretending to be friendly. She remembered him ordering a whiskey neat that night, then disappearing for a while before the body was found. She was the one who called 911, her hands shaking. The breakthrough came when Uncle Henry talked to Brian, the bar manager. Brian, an older guy who'd run the place for 20 years, mentioned they'd upgraded their security system a month before. The police had only taken the main camera footage, but there was a backup system that recorded the hallway to the bathrooms. Brian still had those files on an old hard drive, gathering dust. We met at Brian's house. His living room smelled like cigarettes and coffee. My stomach was in knots as he connected the drive. The footage showed Brandon entering the bathroom at 9:47 p.m., casual. Dad entered at 9:52 p.m., probably just after his shift. Brandon came out at 9:51 p.m., checking his watch, smoothing his shirt. Dad came out at 9:53 p.m., covered in blood, shouting for help, his face a mask of horror. It was clear as day. Brandon had 4 minutes alone in that bathroom. More than enough time to set up a frame job. Uncle Henry copied the footage onto multiple USB drives, his hands steady. "We need to be careful," he warned. "Brandon might have connections. We need an airtight case." He told me to act normal at home, not to let on that we knew anything. It was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. But Brandon must have sensed something. Maybe I was a bad actress. Maybe he was just paranoid. He started getting more aggressive. One night, he came into my room and sat on my bed, the mattress dipping. The hallway camera couldn't see him from that angle. He said he knew I'd been sneaking around with Uncle Henry. Someone had seen us at the library, probably one of his buddies who seemed to be everywhere. He said if I didn't stop, Mom might get hurt. "Accidents happen all the time," he drawled, his voice casual. "People fall downstairs. Cars have brake problems. Gas leaks happen." I understood the threat. Felt it settle in my chest like a cold stone. I was terrified, but I tried to stay calm, keeping my breathing even. I told Uncle Henry everything at our next meeting, whispering even though we were alone. "We need to move faster," he said. He'd already contacted Dad's lawyer, showing him what we'd found. The lawyer was excited but cautious. "We need the original journal, too," he said. "It'll strengthen the case, prove the photos aren't doctored." I said I'd get it, even though the thought made me want to throw up. That night, I waited until 3 a.m., watching the clock's red numbers change with agonizing slowness. I crept to the bathroom, bare feet silent on the carpet, retrieved the journal from the toilet tank. It was still dry, safe in its plastic wrapping. I put it in my backpack, zipping it into the inner pocket. But when I came out, Brandon was standing in the hallway like a ghost. "What are you doing up?" His eyes glinted in the darkness. "I feel sick," I mumbled, clutching my stomach. He stared at me for a long moment, then let me pass. I felt his eyes burning into my back all the way to my room. The next morning, my backpack was gone. I found it in the kitchen, empty, its contents spread across the table. Brandon was sitting there, the journal open in front of him, flipping pages with theatrical interest. Mom was reading it, her face pale and confused. Brandon had told her I'd been writing fantasy stories about him, that I was disturbed, that I needed help. He pointed to specific entries. "Look how she's trying to copy your husband's handwriting. See how she mentions you and me together? This is clearly her sick fantasy about breaking us up." Mom's confusion twisted into anger as Brandon wove his lies, just enough truth mixed in to make them believable. She believed him. "I'm disappointed in you," she said, her voice sharp. "Making up lies about Brandon is sick. I thought you were dealing with Dad's absence better than this." I tried to tell her it was Dad's journal, but she wouldn't listen. She accused me of forging Dad's handwriting to frame Brandon because I couldn't accept him as my new father. She said I needed therapy, maybe even a special boarding school for troubled teens. Brandon, ever so helpful, suggested his cousin ran one in another state. Very strict, very isolated. Good for fixing problem children. The way he said it, my blood ran cold. The walls were closing in. That day at school, I found Uncle Henry's truck in the parking lot at lunch. I climbed in and broke down, sobbing, telling him everything. He reassured me, "Don't worry, we still have the footage." But when I got home, my phone was gone. Brandon had it. He'd gone through everything, found my cloud account, guessing the password after 3 tries. He made me watch as he deleted all the journal photos, his fingers stabbing at the screen with vicious satisfaction. "Uncle Henry's copies won't matter," he sneered. "Without the original to verify them against, they're just doctored photos. Any decent lawyer will argue they're fake." The bar footage was different, he admitted. Official security, verifiable timestamps. But handwriting? Photos? Too easy to forge. That night, Mom told me I was leaving for boarding school on Monday. "This special place will help you deal with your delusions about Brandon," she said. It was 1,000 miles away in the mountains. No phones. No outside contact for 6 months. This was his plan. To shut me up, to make me disappear. I managed to slip out Saturday morning when Mom went grocery shopping and Brandon was in the shower. I could hear the water running as I eased open the front door. I ran to Ashley's house, used her phone to call Uncle Henry. Ashley's mom was at work, and Ashley covered for me, bless her heart. I told him about the boarding school. He said, "Pack a bag. Meet me at the library in an hour." But when I got back home, Brandon was waiting on the front steps, his hair still damp. He'd noticed I was gone. He grabbed me, dragging me inside by my hair, my scalp burning. Mom wasn't back yet. He threw me against the wall, hard enough to knock a picture frame down. "You ruined everything," he hissed. I worked too hard to let a bratty kid destroy my plans. He started ranting, saying Dad deserved to rot in prison, that he'd been planning this for months before that night at the bar. He said Mom was easy to manipulate, so desperate for attention after Dad started working 2 jobs. A desperate thought flashed through my mind. "Why?" I demanded, needing to hear him say it. "Why did you call that man in the bathroom?" Brandon laughed, an ugly, chilling sound. "The guy was just in the wrong place at the wrong time," he sneered. He'd gone in to plant a bloody knife, one with Dad's prints he'd taken from home. But the hammered guy saw him, started asking questions, getting too close. So Brandon had to silence him quick and messy with that same knife. Then, when Dad walked in minutes later to help, it was perfect. Fresh blood. Dad's prints all over everything as he tried to save the victim. And in the chaos, Brandon pocketed the actual murder weapon and left a different knife, one he'd also prepared, that wouldn't trace back to him. I was recording everything on Ashley's phone, which I'd hidden in my pocket, the record button pressed before I even walked in. Brandon didn't notice. He was too busy ranting about how smart he'd been, how he'd worn gloves, how he'd studied the bar's schedule for weeks. He said after Dad was gone, marrying Mom was just smart business. She had good life insurance. And I'd be worth even more in Social Security if something happened to her. Maybe a car accident, maybe a fall, maybe she'd just get sad and take too many pills. That's when Mom walked in. She'd forgotten her wallet. She heard everything. Her face went white as paper. She dropped the groceries, oranges rolling across the floor. Brandon spun around, realizing his mistake. He tried to backtrack, saying I'd made him angry, that he didn't mean it, just trying to scare me straight. But Mom had heard enough. The veil had finally lifted. Brandon stepped toward her, but she backed away, her hand reaching behind her. "Get out," she screamed. He said she was overreacting. She grabbed a kitchen knife from the block. "Leave, or I'll call the police." Brandon laughed. "You wouldn't dare. Too much scandal, too much shame. What would the neighbors think?" But Mom's hand was steady. For the first time in months, I saw the Mom I used to know, the one who protected me. Brandon realized she was serious. His mask dropped completely. He grabbed his keys and wallet. "This isn't over," he snarled, looking at Mom. "I know too much about you. The affairs before Dad. The money you stole from his savings. If you go to the police, I'll destroy your reputation." Then he left, slamming the door so hard the window shook. Mom collapsed, sobbing, her body shaking. I sat next to her and showed her the recording on Ashley's phone. She listened, her face crumbling with each word of Brandon's confession. She kept saying, "I'm sorry. I was so stupid. I failed you and Dad. I told her we needed to call the police now, but she was terrified of Brandon's threats. I called Uncle Henry. He arrived within minutes with the bar footage on a USB drive. We set Mom down at the kitchen table and showed her everything, the journal entries I'd saved, screenshots of the security footage, the notarized witness statements he'd collected. Mom threw up. She had been sleeping next to Dad's killer for months, planning a wedding with him. Finally, she agreed. We called the police. 2 detectives came. Professional but kind. They listened to Brandon's confession multiple times, watched the bar footage. They took the journal as evidence. One detective admitted they'd had doubts about Dad's case. The forensics never quite added up. Brandon's confession filled in all the gaps. An arrest warrant was put out that night. But he disappeared. His apartment empty, car gone. A patrol car was stationed outside our house. Mom and I didn't sleep. We pushed the couch against the front door, sat in the living room with all the lights on, jumping at every sound. The next morning, Uncle Henry called. His construction buddies had spotted Brandon at a motel 2 towns over, trying to pay cash. The police were on their way. By noon, they had him. He tried to run but didn't get far. They found evidence in his car linking him to the original murder weapon. He'd kept the actual knife all these years, like a sick trophy, hidden in a lockbox in his trunk. The decoy knife at the crime scene was just that, a decoy. The real one still had traces of the victim's blood. Brandon denied everything at first. He claimed I'd faked the recording using AI, that Mom was lying to protect me. But the evidence was overwhelming. The bar footage. His fingerprints on the real murder weapon. The forensics that hadn't matched Dad suddenly made perfect sense when applied to Brandon. Even the angle of the wounds matched Brandon's height. Faced with everything, he broke. He confessed fully in exchange for a plea deal. He admitted to planning the whole thing, framing Dad, manipulating Mom. He even admitted to other crimes in other states, other victims who'd been blamed for things they didn't do. The detective said Brandon was a serial predator, moving from place to place, finding vulnerable women with kids. Dad's lawyer filed an emergency appeal. The judge reviewed everything and ordered Dad's immediate release. After 8 months in prison for a crime he didn't commit, Dad was coming home. Mom and I drove to pick him up. The ride was silent, except for the radio. Mom kept crying. I didn't know what to say. When the prison gates opened and Dad walked out, he looked smaller, thinner, older. But his eyes lit up when he saw me. I ran to him and hugged him tighter than I'd ever hugged anyone. He smelled different, like industrial soap and sadness, but he was still my dad. He held me, crying into my hair, whispering how much he'd missed me, how he never stopped believing I'd know the truth. Mom stood back, unsure, wringing her hands. Dad looked at her, then said they'd talk later. He just wanted to go home. The drive back was quiet, Dad asking small questions. How was school? Had I grown taller? Was my favorite restaurant still open? Normal dad questions that felt anything but normal after everything. We got home, and Dad just stood in the doorway, looking around like he was memorizing everything. The house looked different without Brandon stuff. Mom had thrown out everything he'd touched, leaving weird empty spaces. Dad walked through each room slowly, touching furniture, picking up picture frames. That first night was awkward. Dad slept on the couch, even though Mom offered him their old bedroom. I heard him moving around at 3 a.m., probably couldn't sleep. I found him in the kitchen, making coffee with shaking hands. We sat in silence until he finally asked, "Are you okay, really okay?" I told him about Brandon, about everything. He listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening. When I finished, he said he was sorry he couldn't protect me. I told him it wasn't his fault. The next few days were a blur of lawyers and paperwork. Dad's record was cleared. There was talk of compensation for wrongful imprisonment, but Dad didn't care about money. He just wanted his life back. Mom kept trying to talk to him, but he wasn't ready. He'd answer in one word, find excuses to leave the room. Brandon's trial was set for 6 months out. The prosecutor said with his confession and all our evidence, he'd get life without parole. They'd linked him to 3 other murders in different states. He'd frame someone close to the victim, then swoop in to comfort the grieving family. The detective said we were lucky his other victims hadn't survived to expose him. I went back to school, but everything felt different. Kids whispered. Everyone knew about Brandon and Dad. Ashley stuck by me and a few other friends who actually mattered. Teachers were extra nice, which almost made it worse. I didn't want pity. I just wanted normal, but normal was gone, probably forever. Dad started working construction with Uncle Henry. Manual labor, he said, helped clear his head. He'd come home exhausted, covered in dust, but calmer. He started seeing a therapist who specialized in wrongful conviction trauma. He didn't talk about the sessions, but I could see they were helping. He stopped flinching when doors slammed. Stopped checking locks obsessively. Mom moved out after 2 weeks. Rented a small apartment, said she needed space. I was relieved. The tension between her and Dad was suffocating. She betrayed him in the worst way, even if Brandon manipulated her. Some things you can't come back from. She asked if I wanted to stay with her sometimes, but I said no. I needed to be with Dad. Divorce papers came a month later. Dad signed them without reading. Just wanted it over. Mom gave him everything, the house, the car, full custody of me. Her guilt was eating her alive. She started seeing a therapist, trying to understand how she'd been so blind. I felt bad for her sometimes, but then I'd remember how she chose Brandon over Dad, how she didn't believe me, and the sympathy would dry up. Uncle Henry became a regular. He'd bring his kids over, and we'd have cookouts like old times. His twins, Elijah and John, idolized Dad. His daughter, Deborah, was my age, and we got close fast. She understood what it was like to have your family turned upside down. 3 months after Dad got out, I had to testify at a pretrial hearing. I wore my nicest dress, the blue one Dad bought me 2 years ago. My hands shook as I swore to tell the truth. Brandon sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, looking smaller. He tried to catch my eye, but I stared straight ahead. I told them everything, the threats, the touching, the night at the hotel. The judge had to call a recess when I talked about finding Dad's journal. I was crying too hard to continue. Dad wasn't allowed in the courtroom, but Uncle Henry gave me a thumbs up from the gallery. Brandon's lawyer tried to make me look like a confused kid, asking if I'd misunderstood Brandon's intentions. I stayed calm. Repeated what happened exactly. The prosecutor showed the recording from Ashley's phone and Brandon's face went gray. His lawyer asked for a plea deal that afternoon. No way, the prosecutor said. After the hearing, reporters swarmed us. Dad shielded me. We pushed through to Uncle Henry's truck. They shouted questions about forgiveness, moving forward, how it felt to see Brandon in chains. We didn't answer. There was nothing to say that would make them understand. This wasn't entertainment. It was our life. Mom started sending me letters, long, rambling apologies. I read the first few, then started throwing them away unopened. Dad said I should consider forgiving her, eventually, for my own peace. But I wasn't ready. Maybe I'd never be ready. She'd chosen a monster over her own family. Some things are unforgivable. Brandon's actual trial was brutal. They brought in his other victims' families. One woman from Arizona testified about how he dated her after her husband died in a suspicious accident. Another family from Nevada talked about their son serving time for a murder that sounded exactly like Dad's case. They were reopening that one too. Dad testified on day 3. He wore his only suit, the one from their wedding. He talked about finding the body, about trying to help, about the confusion when they arrested him. He talked about prison, missing my birthday, writing letters I'd never get. His voice broke when he talked about the day I was born, how he promised to always protect me and felt like he'd failed. Brandon took the stand on day 5, against his lawyer's advice. He tried to paint himself as a victim, claimed the man in the bathroom attacked him first. But under cross-examination, his story fell apart. He contradicted himself, got angry, showed his true face to the jury. When the prosecutor asked about his plans for me and Mom, he refused to answer. His own lawyer looked defeated. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. Guilty on all counts: murder, conspiracy, fraud, attempted assault on a minor. The list went on. The judge sentenced him to life without parole. Consecutive sentences for each crime. Brandon didn't react, just stared at the table. As they led him out, he looked at me one last time. I stared back, wanting him to see that he hadn't broken me, that I had won. Dad and I went to his favorite Mexican restaurant after. The owner hugged him, said the meal was on the house. We ate in comfortable silence, both exhausted but relieved. It was over. Really over. Brandon would die in prison. And we could start rebuilding. Mom tried to come to the house the next week. Dad wouldn't let her in, talked to her through the screen door. She wanted to apologize again, wanted family counseling. Dad said no. That ship has sailed. She needs to move on, and so do we. She cried and begged, but Dad stood firm. I watched from the stairs, feeling nothing. She'd made her choice, and now she had to live with it. I started seeing a therapist, too. Dr. Cheryl. She helped me process everything, taught me it wasn't my fault, that I'd been incredibly brave. Some days I believed her, some days I didn't. But slowly, the nightmares stopped. I stopped checking locks obsessively, stopped flinching when men walked behind me. Progress came in small steps. Dad and I developed new routines. Sunday breakfast at the diner, Wednesday movie nights, helping Uncle Henry with projects on Saturdays. We talked more than we ever had before. He helped me with homework, even though math wasn't his strong suit. He came to every school event, cheering too loud at my mediocre clarinet performances. We were learning how to be a family again, just the two of us. 6 months after the trial, Dad met someone. Caroline, the bartender who testified. First, just as a friend, then something more. She made Dad laugh, real laughs. I liked her. She didn't try to be my mom, just treated me like a person. Dad smiled more when she was around. Mom eventually stopped trying to contact us. I heard she moved to another state. Part of me hoped she'd find peace. Part of me didn't care. She'd been so easily fooled, so quick to replace Dad. Maybe Brandon had seen that weakness in her from the start. A year after everything, Dad got a settlement for wrongful imprisonment. Not millions, but enough to pay off the house, put money away for my college. He bought a new truck, took a vacation. He kept working construction, though. Said he liked the honesty of it. You either built something right or you didn't. No room for lies or manipulation. I turned 15 that spring. Dad threw me a big party, probably overcompensating for the birthdays he'd missed. Uncle Henry's family came. Caroline was there. Even some kids from school. For a few hours, we felt like a normal family. That night, after everyone left, Dad and I cleaned up the yard in comfortable silence. He thanked me for believing in him. I told him I always knew he was innocent. He hugged me tight and said I'd saved his life. We both cried a little, but it was the good kind of tears, the healing kind. Life went on. I made honor roll, started dating a nice guy. Dad threatened to clean his shotgun when he came over, but he was joking. Mostly. Caroline moved in after a year, bringing her cat. We became a weird little family, built on shared trauma, but held together by choice and love. Brandon died in prison 2 years later. Heart attack, the letter said. He was 43. I felt nothing. Just closed the letter and went back to my homework. Dad asked if I was okay. I said, yeah, I really was. Brandon had been dead to me since the day they sentenced him. His actual death was just paperwork. Mom sent a card for my 18th birthday. Just signed, Love, Mom. No return address. I kept it for some reason, tucked in my desk drawer with other things I couldn't quite throw away. Dad said maybe someday I'd want to find her, make peace. Maybe he was right. Or maybe some bridges are meant to stay burned. Time would tell. I got into college on a full scholarship, planning to study criminal justice. Maybe become a lawyer, help other families torn apart by lies. Dad cried at graduation. Caroline took 1,000,000 pictures. Uncle Henry's family cheered. My chosen family. The one that stood by me when everything fell apart. The night before I left for college, Dad and I sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies. He told me he was proud of me. I told him I loved him, that he was the best dad anyone could ask for. We sat in comfortable silence. No need for more words. We'd survived the worst thing imaginable and came out stronger. That was enough. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I hadn't found Dad's journal that night. If Brandon had succeeded in sending me away. If Mom had married him. If Dad had died in prison believing nobody cared. But I did find it. I did fight back. And sometimes that's all you can do. Fight for the truth and hope someone listens. In our case, they finally did. This whole journey, it changed me forever. It showed me the darkest parts of humanity, but also the incredible strength of family, chosen or otherwise. It taught me about perseverance, about standing up for what's right, even when everyone else tells you you're wrong. So, I've shared my story with you. It's raw, it's intense, and it's real. I'd love to know, have any of you ever faced a betrayal that shook your world to its core? How did you find the strength to keep going, to fight for your truth? Or maybe you've had to make an impossible choice, like my dad or even my mom. Tell me what you think. I really want to know.